With the launch of the new slim revision of the PlayStation Vita, Sony is no doubt hoping all kinds of new customers will come flocking to the platform. Honestly, we are too. We like the Vita. It has a pretty solid library, and when you factor in all the PSP games you can play, that library increases dramatically. What makes PSP games on Vita especially great is that the system's backward compatibility mode allows you to customize your control setup. So what, you may ask? Well, remember that the PSP lacked dual analog sticks, so a ton of games simulated it clumsily with the 4 face buttons. On Vita, you can assign those face buttons to the right stick, which means games that wanted dual analog controls but were limited by the hardware can throw off those oppressive limitations and be played the way they were meant to. The third game in the Parasite Eve series has problems. It's bad enough that protagonist Aya Brea's clothes shred to near nudity when she takes damage, but when you learn that her perpetually semi-nude body is possessed by the soul of her preteen sister Maya, well, gross. But skeevy plot mechanics aside, the Third Birthday actually is a pretty solid shooter RPG hybrid. Admittedly, it's not as good as something like Mass Effect 2 or 3, but for a portable experience, this is about as good as it gets. Skip the story bits and just enjoy the shooting. This spin-off of the Japanese multimedia phenomenon Black Rock arrived in the US with barely a blip last year. Probably because the PSP was dead in the water by that point. But seriously, it looks nice enough that it makes a perfect fit for Vita. And that whole shooter reference in the title isn't just an empty word. This is a third-person shooter, and it plays like it was meant for Vita's twin-stick format. The story is weird and incredibly bleak, but while you're zipping around blowing up giant robots, you probably won't care. These compilations of several dozen Capcom arcade hits are worth having around regardless of the system you're playing on. But they work especially well on Vita thanks in large part to the great work Digital Eclipse did in producing the compilations. Vertically oriented shooters like 1941 and 43 can be played in Tate mode, which proves to be fairly comfortable on Vita despite the awkwardness of holding the system sideways. And some of the quirkier arcade titles here, like Forgotten Worlds, can be tweaked to use dual sticks and shoulder triggers to make them feel far more contemporary than their creators could ever have intended. A quintessential top-down shooter in the style of Geometry Wars, Everyday Shooter simply begs for a dual-stick configuration. Its console releases did the twin-stick thing, but obviously the PSP version had to fake it. Now you can restore justice to the universe by out-faking the game. It's not perfect, but it's definitely good enough. I have no idea why Namco released its Monster Hunter clone God's Eater here in the US. By the time it showed up, PSP was dead in the water, and it's not like America has been champing at the bit for more Monster Hunter clones. Nevertheless, it's out here, and it's not too shabby. If you ever have a hankering for cooperative battles against giant beasts and machines with a faster, more casual feel than Capcom's original Monster Hunter series, you could do worse than God's Eater. I'm admittedly not a huge fan of the Killzone series, but I can't deny Liberation is one of the absolute best-looking games on PSP. Switching over to Vita may not make a Killzone fan out of anyone, but overall it makes a much better gaming experience than playing Killzone in its native format. Prior to Ground Zeroes, Peace Walker represented the most modern take on the Metal Gear concept, a spectacular third-person stealth shooter. As with most other games on this list, using the right stick to help you with fine-tuning your weapon aim in battle makes a huge difference, turning an excellent game into an absolutely phenomenal one. But there's another benefit to playing on Vita too. The larger screen makes it much easier to aim at enemies and take them down from a distance with your stun pistol, greatly benefiting your stealth tactics. Easily the single most popular series on PSP, the Monster Hunter games are to PSP what Pokemon is to Nintendo systems. It's huge, epic, and incredibly uncomfortable thanks to the unfriendly button layout of the PSP. Monster Hunter Claw is a thing that exists. RSI is probably more dangerous than the beasts you battle here. Good thing the Vita exists to link those camera controls to the right stick. Or if you prefer, you can link your weapons to the stick instead. Monster Hunter is going to be kind of clunky no matter how you go about playing it, but downloading it for play on Vita can definitely help ease the very real pain. Okay, Tactics Ogre doesn't really benefit in any particular way from being on Vita. It's just a really great game that more people need to play. A top-to-bottom overhaul of the 16-bit classic that inspired Final Fantasy Tactics, Tactics Ogre is basically the gold standard for remakes. Faithful in many respects, but improved in practically every way, except that awful crafting system. This should have a permanent home on your system, whether that system is a PSP or a Vita. You know, there's an actual legitimate Ys release for Vita, Memories of Salsetta, that uses the same basic game engine as Ys 7. But if you have to pick between one or the other, I'm going to recommend that you go with the older PSP game. Due to some weird shenanigans caused by Falcom retooling it from PSP to Vita sometime during the course of development, Memories of Salsetta actually looks and moves worse on Vita than Ys 7 does. Weird, right? But your eyes don't lie. For more life-changing video game advice, keep your browser tuned to usgamer.net.